So, first, let me say I'm going to be a bit uncomfortable as we're chatting. I hurt my legs. So, people who follow me know that I do the flying trapeze. This is my thing, right? Through the air like the circus. But our place here in Montreal has since closed. So, I had to find something, of course, to scare me to death and to be a bit adventurous. So, I started adult gymnastics.
Oh,
S-
wow.
Yeah. So, last week went pretty well. I was a bit sore, but it wasn't that bad. But then today, we're working on getting a round off, and the coach says to me, well, you can do it, because we've like been building up. I go to do my first one, and of course I'm an old lady, and I completely
Old
pulled the,
lady.
the muscle in my leg and my butt. So I'm going to be shifting a lot because I'm pretty uncomfortable right now because of
Okay.
my
I
gymnastics
I
career.
sh I shift all the time, it's just the way I am. I'm gonna try not to rock. Usually when I feel very comfortable, I start
You
rocking,
start
and
rocking.
so yeah.
Okay. Um, well, I'm really happy what we're going to talk about today, because Robert is like, I'm living vicariously through my guest, Robert Party, who's here today. I'm someone who sees a fragility of life all the time because I work with older adults, and the average age of my client is probably 85. So I'm seeing what can happen at the end of life. I see what people think about and the regrets they have and the remorse that they carry or the guilt that they carry. And I can see what, like, as they're telling me about their life, when they look back and say, I should have, I wish I would have, why didn't I? And they don't take life for what it is and the value of what it is and do what they want in the moment. And for me, I'm pretty good at taking some risks, but still, I'm not taking as many as I want to in my mind. I'm not doing everything that I think that I could do, out of probably fear mostly, and of course responsibilities when you have a family and such. But Robert Party, my guest, man, this guy is like throwing caution to the wind. I'm going the extra mile. But it wasn't because of something positive that happened in his life, although he's turned it into something that's added value to his life. It was something really horrible. His wife was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and he became her caregiver. And you can see Robert's a young guy, and he was her caregiver for 11 years. So this happened very early on in their marriage, right after he had finished his MBA. She was starting her residency, I think, Robert, right, as a
No,
physician.
she was actually still in the MD-PhD program.
Okay, so she was still in the program, but had set out to be a physician, and then they get this news. Fast forward, Robert now, his wife unfortunately has passed away, but Robert now has said, "Okay, I see what life can do. I see what can happen in life, and I'm going to just do something completely different." And he has now changed careers and moved to another country and written a book called Chasing Life. This guy is like, you know what? I know it can happen. I'm going to take every moment for what it's worth and just live it to the fullest. So, Robert, thank you for being here. And I'm really excited to hear your story.
No, thank you very much. I've seen your work, so for me and your guests, being part of the family that you've created is fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, thanks, Robert. So first, let's just go back. I want to hear a bit about when you met your wife and she was healthy, and what you guys had set out to do, like your hopes and dreams. What had you imagined your life with her was going to be?
Sure, and that's a great question to start with because it's probably something we should come back to because change in general requires us to let go of some of the expectations we had early on, right?
Mm.
So when I met Desiree, she was 17, I was 19. Um, I have to say, I wasn't necessarily ever thinking I would be married or have a relationship because I watched a very dysfunctional relationship between my parents, and my dad was an abusive alcoholic. So I sort of thought, I was going to be this standalone island, and I was pursuing an investment banking career because for me, the child in me was money would save me. Money would
Mm.
give me freedom. It would help me get away from everything. And here I meet Desiree, and I say all the time, we did not get along when we met because she was very opinionated, a very strong 17-year-old woman. I grew up in an Italian American family, so I wasn't necessarily used to women countering like she would, or being so opinionated. And I was like, wow, like she pushes, like this is pretty interesting. She was gorgeous. So, there was that aspect that I was like, okay, wow,
And you
what is,
were only 19,
and
so
I
that
was,
might
yeah,
have led the decision making.
it definitely might have, but I have to say it was more, we had these really amazing conversations. Conversations I wouldn't have expected at such a young age, just about life and building life and what a relationship should look like. So when, like, I sort of knew very early on, I had told my mom, like, I met the woman I was going to marry, and she's like, you're crazy. She's not even Italian. I'm like, well, she actually is half Italian, she's an Italian, Irish. But we really just assumed we were going to have that type of yuppie lifestyle and live that. She wanted to become a doctor. I was going to be the investment banker. We had these visions. We went to Stony Brook University, and around Port Jefferson, there were all these big mansions being built. And we would sneak in and see what they look like and stuff. And we're like, yeah, we'll have this one day. Like, we had all these dreams. We wanted to travel. Some of that actually came to fruition in terms of the ability to travel and living in New York. And even though we lived it was a 6 flight walk up, it was a studio apartment with a Murphy bed. For me, it was still the best apartment I've ever lived in.
Hmm.
It was just the perfect place.
So
So,
you guys started your relationship. I just want to say for 1 second,
sure.
Robert, your mouthpiece keeps hitting your thing, so it's
Okay.
making like a rattling
Sure.
noise. Can you,
Sure. In fact,
yeah, or take off your scarf or something and
yeah,
maybe it
in
won't
fact,
hit if you don't mind,
it's
unless
such an
YouTube.
Italian thing to wear a scarf in the house, but
Exactly. Are
so,
you also eating pasta?
not yet, not yet.
I'm probably going to get some messages about how that was, I don't know, like
Okay.
inappropriate to say that you're eating pasta because you're Italian. Anyways, I'm Jewish. I'm eating latkes. Does that balance it now? Okay. um, so you have these dreams, this yuppie lifestyle, everything's going to be great. You're going to have money. You're going to pursue your passions. And then she was quite young when she got the diagnosis. How old was she?
Yeah. Actually, interestingly enough, she found the tumor when just around 29 years old. Now, in 1996, a 29-year-old woman with a history of cystic breasts, no history of breast cancer in the family, was not going to be sent for a mammogram or a biopsy. Standard, so I can't put anybody in that. But the doctor basically said, "Oh, this is like any other cyst; it's going to go away." Um, the next year, I was offered a job in the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, and we decided it would be a great opportunity to sort of, do that whole traveling. And she was still doing her PhD. She was going to finish her PhD. And we were like, okay, every 6 weeks we could meet in a different country and we can live this really cool lifestyle. And then she was going to come out and live with me. After she finished her PhD, on the plane back to Abu Dhabi, she had a really bad pain under her left arm. And she had asked me to feel underneath it, and like my heart just dropped. Feel like felt this huge lump. And so she needed to get a physical anyway in Abu Dhabi to get the residency visa to live there. So I was like, why don't we just do a full physical? Like, because they normally test for like tuberculosis and other things that are contagious. And that just
That
diagnosis
started.
immediately, it just,
Okay.
spiraled in weeks, basically.
There's 2 things that I'm thinking about. One I do wanna get to is like, okay, so what is that immediate thought process of what you do, digesting that information? The other piece that I'm thinking about is you told me that a year prior she had felt something, and I know how I am. I don't know how I could ever move beyond that. Like, that in and of itself must have been so hard of, I felt this, it was there, I could have caught it sooner, and I think I will ruminate in that place. Did either of you do that?
Wow, those are great questions because, um, when my wife passed away, her story was front page of the New York Times because she dealt with it in a very unusual way. So my wife, when she was diagnosed, and this was something typical she did. She didn't believe in judgment, and that included herself. So she only ever wanted to know she was doing her best. She never knew the results on her exams. She didn't know her GPA. She didn't know her MCAT scores. She asked me to take care of those. She was like, I just want to know I'm doing my best. I don't want to judge myself. Fill those in on the application. And the way it just happened in the hospital, the doctor, and not because of the Muslim religion at all, because he was male. I think it was, he was an Egyptian that was trained in Massachusetts at Mass General, very young, having a woman that looked extremely healthy in front of him with stage 3 breast cancer. He didn't know how to break the news. So he broke it to me and it worked out perfect. Now, I knew my wife, and yes, the whole rumination, she would have sat in that. So she didn't want to know the size of her tumor, the number of lymph nodes or anything. And I said, Des, I, we can't fault anybody here because basically 99% of this tumor is healthy tissue. So, they could have biopsied it back then and it could have come out okay. So, maybe it just happened recently, but it's not something for us to worry about. For me, like they had given me all the statistics. So I was like, oh my God, like my head was just spinning. But I knew for her, she just needed to know this was all going to be manageable. And we were both fighters. So it was like, okay, let's attack this. And there wasn't necessarily that, oh, woe is me. It was more, okay, we're going to deal with this. She's young, we're young. We're going to figure out what's the best thing to do. And she said to me, she said, Robert, I want to be as aggressive as possible. I will define for you what is aggressive, what is quality of life, the goes, the no goes, all those other things, but I need you to handle it. I know enough to be dangerous to myself because I'm studying medicine. I don't want to have that career ruined because of my own fears. So can you move this out of my life for me as best as possible? And I said, sure. To the point where when she was studying, I would actually read the oncology sections and I would summarize the breast cancer material in the best way possible for her to study for the exams.
My head is spinning thinking about your wife, and I can see why, even at 17, she had a maturity about her in the conversations you were having, and you were very attracted to her. Obviously, she had an amazing ability to separate herself from facts interfering with her self-esteem, with her self-confidence, because our society is very judgment oriented, and there's all of these like markers, whether it's a cancer marker or a mark in school, or in my new gymnastics career, how many minutes, or I should say seconds, can I hold a handstand, right? But we're always evaluating things, and it just amazes me that your wife, even at the young age of 29, because I'm still struggling with this and I'm almost 52, that she was able to do that, to separate herself and say, I'm never going to judge myself for these outside criteria. Instead, I'm just going to judge myself on a feeling that I have, that I'm doing my best with everything. And I find this remarkable, and I can see why that helped her live for such a long period of time, because she wasn't carrying that additional thought patterns and stress. But I'm curious, Robert, she wasn't carrying that, but now it's like, blah, now it's in your lap. Here, Robert, you deal with all of that information. What was that hard for you? Like, how did you manage that?
You know, it's really interesting because it was in carrying that I actually learned what purpose actually means, or where I came up with my own idea of purpose. The first part of it actually was not bad at all. I mean, first she was a warrior. We'd fly back. Now, this is how crazy it was. She decided she wanted to stay in Abu Dhabi. So she had the surgery, the mastectomy, a radical mastectomy in Dubai, healed. We flew back to the United States, found the appropriate doctor, And then she'd get chemo, she'd get on a plane that night, fly back to Abu Dhabi. She'd recover for 3 weeks. We'd get back on a plane again. So all that money I was going to save at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority went away. But it was just a little moment, and we were like, "All right, we've got this." When the cancer recurred, um, two
How old
interesting.
was she at that time now?
Um, I'd say 33.
Okay.
Basically, I don't think it ever went away. They didn't really use PET scans back then, so a CAT scan isn't as sensitive. So I wonder if that lesion was always in her liver and it just finally got big enough. But she did a stem cell transplant. She
Oh
did
my goodness.
regular chemo, the breast reconstruction, all of that, and then like 6 months later, it came back. So when it came back, interesting things happened. Desiree, while she was technically NED, she seemed somewhat depressed, and NED is no evidence of disease. Um, and for her, she needed to get rid of the worry it was going to come back. And when it came back, she felt relieved in a way. Or if we
Oh.
would have hit that like 7 year or nine, whatever that mark is, right?
Can
Um,
I just let me
sure.
just interject for 1 second, then I want you to go on with that story. There's two ways that I can completely relate to that. My sister had stage 0 breast cancer and she got a full mastectomy because she said, I know my head. I will never be able to live life wondering if this is going to come back. Am I going to die and my kids will be without a mother?
Yeah.
So she just said, I'm going to the extreme decision because I know my head. So I can appreciate your wife feeling that way. And for me, and this sounds maybe crazy, but I'm kind of like, I'm always worried about illness and you're going to get sick and a little germ phobic, not completely phobic, but concerned. And then when COVID hit, I said to my husband, you see, I told you I have masks, I have gloves, I was stocked, And so, because I was always like, when is something
Yeah.
coming? So I can appreciate that for your wife. There's almost like a, okay, now let's face it,
Well,
it's
she
here
called
as I
it
knew.
Damocles sword.
What did she
And
call it?
Damocles sword, and I actually had to
Okay.
look that up because it's a
Yeah.
mythological thing about
Okay.
a sword hanging over your head by a fine little thread. And when is it going to fall?
Yes.
So you definitely can relate by what you said. And for my wife, when she had the mastectomy, they only took off the diseased breast and they left the healthy breast. And that just, she would have nightmares about that. She was like, I just want it off. And plus, also for a woman, I mean, I don't know what is worse because your identity is already so assaulted by having the disease itself. But she was lopsided and, having to just from everything from intimacy issues to sort of looking okay in clothes and one, let's say one prosthesis too heavy, one too light, they hurt, it was tiring, all those crazy things. But so she was able to sort of say, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. Where I was like, holy, my whole life has changed. Like now there is something terminal. We're on a different track here than I thought. And I suffered from the Superman syndrome. I thought we were, I was just going to save her. And so I had a very hard time with that. And it was when I realized that my being so overwhelmed by it was actually causing her to try to help me that I was like, oh, the equation's wrong here. And I realized a few things. For me, the definition of caregiver was not to fix, but was to bear witness to and support a person's life journey. And I call it a life journey because it's a life journey up until that very last moment. The second aspect was I realized for me, the definition of purpose was when my passions came in alignment with my values and I want to give away the results. I'm not holding on to the results for my own benefit or to pat myself on the back, but I actually want to give them away. And so carrying the burden for her became so purposeful that it never felt heavy. Now, when the doctor called me into his office to discuss results, which he never did, that 9-block walk to the oncologist's office, I was bawling in tears because I knew where I was going and what I was going to hear. And I walked into the office, his staff, that their faces were all red. I mean, and we had a really good conversation because Desiree, by that point in time, became the founding director of palliative care at New York Hospital.
That's so ironic.
And he said, this is the time that we would talk about hospice to somebody, but that's not who Desiree is. And that's really a big tenet of palliative care, is to understand who is in front of you. You don't see them as an object. And that's the problem about being a caregiver that wants to fix. You create a situation in which the person loses their identity and they become an object to be fixed instead of being there to witness their humanity.
And you, even in what you did in separating yourself out and finding purpose in carrying the information, the numbers, and the I guess the way that you had to kind of translate what the doctor was saying and present it to Desiree in a way that was okay for her to hear, just those basic things she wanted. Like for you, it was like, this is the gift I'm giving her. And just because you were able to do that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be bawling on the way to the doctors. It doesn't mean that you weren't feeling all of the pain and sadness that your wife was extremely ill. You're just saying that you were able to somehow like divide that out. The other comment I just want to make, and this is about this physician and talking about hospice and palliative, and then please go on with that part of the
Sure.
story. But how humane for me to hear that you had a physician, or Desiree had a physician following her that, number one, respected her wishes and turned to you instead of her as instructed, and then understood who she was in her core at that moment instead of imposing his belief systems and that is what medicine should be, regardless of whether or not it's palliative. It should be a humane profession, and it's not always like that, and that's other reasons, and it's not necessarily bad doctors, it's probably the systemic time constraints and all these other things. But I love hearing that that's who she had following her. That's really nice.
Well, if I could just say, first, we were so blessed. We changed oncologists midstream, but her first oncologist was the most amazing man, and think back 1999, allowing someone that just had chemo to get on a plane and fly to a foreign country was insane. But that was palliative. He knew that's what she wanted to do. And he said, we'll make it work. Like, she was wearing masks before they were fashionable, on the plane. So it was about quality of life. And we were very, very blessed. And the second doctor, the same thing. He sat down when we first went into his office, and he said, how can I help you? The first thing she asks is, am I going to die? And I'm like, are you? Like, really? Are we going to have this conversation? We don't even have this conversation, Des. I can't believe you asked the doctor in front of me. And he said, of course you are. I can't tell you when. I may die before you. He goes, but how can I help you? What do you want? And he pushed her until she said, I want more energy because I want to be able to do my job. And he said, well, that's something we can work with. And I think part of the whole system, and we're deviating a little bit, but I just want to say this because I think it's important. We've also created a system in which we, as the patient, go to the doctor and say, I'm broken, fix me. I'm diabetic, give me a pill so I continue to eat donuts. And so we've created a system in a way where we're not seeing people, but we're seeing disease management. And that partly falls on all of us as well. But
Absolutely. And Mike George, by the way, he said he totally agrees on to focus on, not to focus on fixing. But that's, the medical model is something is broken. Now we have to fix it. But it is about having the patient define what quality of life means to them, to him or her, and to also see the person. This is a lot of the work that I do, is as that full person, the spiritual aspects, the emotional aspects, because sometimes our role as a professional has nothing to do with actual the physical health. It has to do with a lot of other things too.
Wha-
So
100%.
yeah,
And that's why I mean, we were so blessed, but that idea of, you know, of course, me having purpose doesn't mean that I don't sit in a corner and break down and cry. Um, you know, there's so much to be said in vulnerability, because it was only by being vulnerable and allowing myself to feel everything that I could actually be fully present. And that's, I also think it's the breeding ground for empathy. I had to a certain extent, live Desiree's disease. You know, when they gave me information, and I'm sure by the end she knew exactly what was going on. She had to, because she was like 80 pounds and she was getting liquid nutrition in the evening. But I always had the story, it's still in your liver, you know. But when she became the founding director of palliative care, she had disease burden in one lung, her peritoneum, her liver, and her spine.
jeez.
And yet she looked the picture of health, because she was where she wanted to be. She was doing what she wanted to do. She was giving her knowledge. I say all the time, I watched my wife evolve. Like, you know, Maslow is completely 100% on target with self-actualization, because I saw it. I awakened. That was my experience to awaken in this life. But I literally watched her evolve. So what?
Tell me about your awakening, Robert, because I
Sure.
want to talk about how because you've talked about purpose and that's where you saw value. Now you're talking about an awakening, and I want to hear about that process of transforming this experience that you had, being in the present moment, and what the changes that you've made in your own life since then.
Sure. Thank you for asking me that question, because sometimes I can go off on tangents. So, um,
It's like this,
my
Robert,
yeah, Robert,
focus.
like, you have focus, because there's so many pieces. I talk all the time about life being a kaleidoscope, and so I see all these different pieces, and sometimes we get so attached to the picture we see, or the image we see in the kaleidoscope, that it's fear that stops us from turning the dial and seeing what's next. And really, I think our true nature is to be curious, but it's fear that stops us from that. So, my awakening actually was to step into curiosity. Um, and what I mean by that is, first, I had to accept death is part of life, and I learned about impermanence. That we all are not meant to survive life. You know, if you wanted to get, which could sometimes be taken, or there could be resistance hearing this, is we all have a terminal disease, because there is an endpoint to our life. So why wait for a doctor to give us a piece of paper and for us to say, am I living the way I want? So impermanence taught me that everything changes and we can't hold on to anything. The same time, the experience with Desiree, I had to realize that if I was focusing on that end point, or trying to control that end point, I'd feel very impotent. I would feel a victim to life. And that's where I learned surrender, because what I can control is how I show up. And I can control that. My intent is to show up as my best self. The thing is, you know, our best is never, it's not always 100%. Sometimes as a caregiver, and Mike could, if he's on the call, you know, he could definitely attest to this. You've been awake for 48 hours. You know what? You'll show up as 10%, but your intent is to do your best with whatever you've got. And so surrender to me allowed me to focus on the current moment. And it redefined hope for me, because I couldn't stay in hoping for a miracle. But what I could do is I could hope for the best day possible today. And the story I always say is, Des and I, we loved traveling. She loved the beach. I mean, I was more mountain guy. She was a beach person, but um, we couldn't do it towards the end of her life. She just physically couldn't travel, and I said one day, why don't we just take a taxi and go out to Coney Island, grab a Nathan's hot dog, and sit on the shore. And we got our hot dogs. She took her shoes off. She walked to the beach, the shore. She put her feet in the water. She turned around. She said, Robert, I'm tired. I need to go home. But before she said that, she had the biggest smile on her face. That was what daily hope produces.
Robert, this conversation is giving me chills. I just love it in so many levels. And when you talked about the things that you've learned, and what holds us back is fear. What also to me I hear when you tell your story is that you stepped into fear. And that's, I see the transformation happens when we step into what makes us afraid. And then it kind of minimizes what actually the fear is. It's like if you're afraid something's under your bed and then you look, you're like, okay, nothing's there. I'm going to address that fear directly and then realize it's a lot bigger than my head than
Well,
it is in reality. The other thing too, Robert, is you lived the worst case scenario, and so for a lot of people, I think they get scared because they're imagining what's the worst case scenario, but you lived it. Your wife died. That is the worst case scenario. So like it's like you've been down that road. You understand how awful it can be. So probably your appreciation as well for the big and those little moments is so great because you had all those, those difficult times and you saw the beauty throughout the difficult times, the feet in the water and the Nathan hot dog at a terrible time in your wife's life, but there was such a beautiful moment threaded within. And so I think to me, that's what I'm hearing is what has helped you move forward and make some pretty dramatic changes in your life, which I want to get to because we're starting to go down on time. I don't want to go too long.
sure, sure, sure. Well, just to talk about the fear thing, right? What what I realized is that fear was stopping me from living life all in. And what I kept thinking is time time is really what this is about, right? And we don't know when our last day is. If I'm staying outside because of fear, I'm losing all of this anyway. So I asked myself the question, what is it costing me to be afraid? And the moment I answered that question, it was obvious. And that comes from the whole economics, opportunity cost and everything else from my previous life. But it was, wait, it's costing me moments because that's what our life is. And I say all the time, we did get to travel everywhere. We really did. We had beautiful experiences, but it is only when we value the ordinary moments that we can live an extraordinary life. That's what builds the life.
100%. And I've gotten really good at actually being in the moment. And it's a running joke in the house because my kids are like, they'll catch me and I'm just looking at them and I'm smiling. My son's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know, just watching you brush your teeth." It's just so cute how you hold the toothbrush. And he's 13. He's like, "Oh my God, mommy." But it's like, but I'm appreciating every single second. I'm trying to absorb every single moment of my children because soon they won't be living in my home and things can happen. And so
Sure.
I think, and it's made me so much happier in my life. So I can really appreciate all of these things that you're saying. And so now what you've done is you've changed your career and you've moved back to Italy in a little tiny village where your grandfather is from, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That's
my my
amazing.
my great grandfather. So
Great
the
grandfather.
great grandfather, but so one of the things that I learned with Desiree, I mean, I learned so many things, but the fact is, there's such a big difference between joy and happiness, and that joy exists all the time. It's always there, but we can't pursue it like we pursue happiness. We have to lean into joy, which comes from vulnerability. If you think, and I say it all the time, if you think of a rainbow, 99.99% of the people stop for a moment to look at that rainbow and they feel that little something. Or if like bubbles, for me, I love bubbles. So if bubbles fly by my face, I get that little like giggle inside of me. That's joy. And so with Desiree, I realized working through those things like impermanence and surrender and fear and everything else, it allowed more joy in with the vulnerability. So when after she passed away, one, I saw a woman achieve what looked like the impossible, right? She became the founding director of palliative care, metastatic breast cancer, before there were all the drugs that are here today, like Ibrance and all those other ones. Um, and she lived what she believed, her values. So when I looked at my life, I went back to finance. After she passed away, I went back to Dubai. One, I had a lot of debt, and not necessarily just because of the medical system, but she was on a lot of supplements, organic foods. You know, we were wheatgrassing, I don't know how many times a day. I don't even know if anyone does that anymore today, but you know, we had the machine and the whole bit. So I went to sort of pay off the bills, but my perspective had changed so much. And what I realized was I became her life coach without realizing it. I had to walk through certain lessons. And I also realized that we're not meant to sit in grief. Grief is a wonderful teacher. You know, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I say it all the time. The word is to walk through. It's not to stop in the valley and have a barbecue. You're there to walk through it and understand the changes that have taken place. And because I learned about impermanence, it was easy in a way to say, I'm going to let this career go and I'm going to go to Italy and I'm going to teach English for $8 an hour because I need the $8. But I'm going to build this new life. And Italy was always a dream for me as a child. You know, Italian American, I was pretty much the only person that ever married outside of the 100% Italian bloodline. So, you know, but my grandfather loved my wife. But, so it was always there, this dream of Italy. And I just thought, why not? You know, I changed the question to, you know, what bad thing can happen to, you know, what can I lose to what can I win? What if I pull it off? You know, is this who I want to be on my deathbed? Because I know my wife was who she wanted to be on her deathbed. She lived exactly who she wanted to be and her values. And I thought, what's the story I want to look back on? And the story of sort of, you said, to step into that fear or like say, you know, walk into the arena. It was to try. And in fact, I learned to stop saying try because try, when we say that word, we've already accepted the excuses as to why it won't happen.
100%. It's an excusive word. I'm going to try.
Yes.
It's like, no, I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to even attempt is more
Yeah.
empowering, right? So, you know, it was the whole idea of can I do it to how can I do it? And yeah, I just showed up with 2 suitcases and decided to really harness because I watched my wife teach from her own experience, harness everything I learned because you know what? Like you have this amazing show. The thing is we're all content creators. The stories we leave behind are content for other people to possibly
Absolutely.
use. And if we could learn as a society to move away from comparing ourselves and go back to admiring people, that's great power.
Well, that certainly removes some of the fear because as your wife did not live in fear of judgment, she in fact did the opposite. She let judgment go. Most of us do live in fear of being judged by others. And so that stops us from doing stuff. It's not even necessarily how we'll feel about ourselves trying something or attempting something. It's what others think about
Right.
what we've done that stops us even more. So how can people, I know that you're doing coaching. So I'll put in the comments section your website, which by the way you have to send it to me so people can get a
Sure.
hold of you for coaching, and you also do speaking, and you also have a book called Chasing Life. It's on Amazon, I guess.
It's on Amazon, yes.
Okay, perfect. So you can find the book on Amazon. And before we close out, Robert, I just want a last word from you. For those of us who get caught in our head and are at that place of what could happen, what could go wrong, instead of what could go well, and we're still in the more the negative angle of perspective. Is there a suggestion that you can give to people, or an exercise where they can just try working on shifting that tendency to say what could go wrong instead of what could go right?
Well, one of the things I like to ask people to do is to look at the truths behind it, right? A lot of the times, the reasons or the fears of why we won't necessarily do something aren't even our own. We've assimilated them from family, or what our congregation might even say, the people around us, because we're breaking away from something. But the questions are, you know what's really true. Yes, it's just as likely, like I said, I could have lost everything, and my worst case scenario was I was going to go live with my mother for a while, right? But my life wasn't going to end. So how can you bring it back to a more realistic point of view? um, the other aspect, which is so important, is we're all unique. So what is it that you're actually here for? What is unique about you? If you're trying to fit into something, and we use fear as an excuse sometimes to keep us in that box, you're actually betraying yourself because you're trying to fit in. But if you accept the fact that your uniqueness is your greatest gift, you'll want to use that gift. You won't want to waste it. So it's also looking at getting back to understanding that you are enough.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, what I tell people is just to say, every day, I am enough. I am enough exactly the way I am.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Robert. And by the way, Mike said your passion and positive energy is contagious, which, and in a
Oh,
good
cool,
way,
Mike. Thank you.
contagious. That word contagious is very scary right now. So
Yeah, it's true.
you're the good kind of contagious. The other thing that I just want to add to what you said, that I say to myself, because I do have these negative thought patterns, and my instinct is to go to the worst case scenario always before the best case scenario, is I typically try and stop myself and say, what evidence do I have to even support that thought pattern? Which
Sure.
almost 100% of the time is zero evidence. So, like, if it's, oh, I don't want to interview Robert because I don't know enough about that topic, so maybe I should do it. I'm like, well, what evidence do I have to show me that I couldn't do an interview of a topic that I didn't know? No evidence. What's the
Right.
worst case scenario? It's just not good, and I pull it down offline. Okay, like, not a big deal, right? So
Right.
that's what I say to myself. Thank you so much, Robert. I'm
Sure.
so happy to have this discussion.
Yeah, this was an
Lots of
honor.
it was great. Lots of, and thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your wife. Desiree sounds like she was an amazing woman, and
She totally was.
I wish I would have been able to know her. Hang on, I'm going to end the
Sure.
broadcast, but hang on a second. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.